Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I am your host, and today we're going to be talking about direct trade. Direct trade, what is it? And what isn't it? Sounds like it might be a simple question to get asked and answered, but it turns out, like many things in chocolate and cocoa, it's a lot less obvious than it seems. Before we get started today, just a quick reminder. If you have a question or a comment about anything that is mentioned in today's episode, you can go into the live chat in YouTube, or you can go into the comments on LinkedIn and Facebook, wherever you're watching, and you can put them in there. I will get them up on screen, and I will do my best to ask and answer them over the course of the episode. And before we jump in, I want to remind everybody that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. And this is the homepage of the chocolate. Well, no, this is not the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. And let me just do one more thing. Oh, we've got my little bug. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. If you're not a member of the Chocolate Life, you can click on the join button, and you'll find a number of different ways that you can support the work that I do here. Since 2008, there's always been a free membership tier. But if you do have the financial resources to support the work that we're doing here, then for as little as $5 a month, you can become a premium member of the Chocolate Life and directly support the work we do. And with that out of the way, let us go to the post for today's episode. And for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post on the Chocolate Life, and this is the one for today. It provides a run of show, but what it also does is it provides a place for me to put my thoughts, but also to put resources that you can go follow and you can link to, right? During the episode or afterwards, your choice. What I want to do is just expand the conversation a bit before we jump into this, and that is to say that definitions are important, right? I don't necessarily want to get into definition fights or anything that might say, well, this is the way it has to be, or this is the way it can't be. But what I want to point out is that the words we use matter. The words you use inform your beliefs inform your actions, and actions have consequences. Now, here we are. We're 30 years into this thing called quote unquote bean to bar chocolate. It was coined by John Scharfenberger and Robert Steinberg when they founded Scharfenberger Chocolate Maker back in the late 1990s. And there is still, 30 years later, no single agreed upon definition for what bean to bar chocolate means. Similarly, we have this thing called craft chocolate. There is no agreed definition. Artisan chocolate, how are artisan the same as bean as craft? How is bean to bar the same as or different from farm to bar or something like that, right? As an industry, as a group, specialty chocolate, which is what I prefer to use as the overall umbrella term, lacks this set of definitions. And one definition that a lot of people use and just assume they know what it means is for direct trade chocolate. What does it mean to be direct trade? And that's what I'm going to be talking about over the course of the rest of this episode. So having jumped in and started things out that way. Here, let's go this a little bit, and we can make it a little bit bigger. I'm not expecting everybody to read this. It's easier for me to follow along. So before I want to go and talk about what direct trade is in chocolate and cocoa, my definition, how I proceed with direct trade, and perhaps I should start off with what do I mean by specialty chocolate. So I use specialty chocolate in parallel to the way the coffee industry uses specialty. So a specialty coffee bean, right, is any bean which has been graded by a certified grader, a Q grader, and received a score above a certain amount. It's 80, I believe, is the number that is used, right? And it talks, this is the cupping score, and there's also consideration of defects in the coffee beans that are in there. That's what it means to be specialty coffee, right? And a specialty coffee beverage is any beverages which is made with a specialty coffee bean, right? You can be a specialty coffee roaster. You you specialize in roasting only coffees that have been determined by a certified curator to be specialty, right? So it's very, very straightforward. And what I want to do in chocolate and cocoa is to be able to get to a point where we have very, very simple to understand definitions. And when it comes to specialty, what I want to do is I want to take advantage of the fact that the specialty coffee industry has spent decades on working this out and getting this understanding. Now, as I believe someone pointed out several weeks ago, it might have been Kurt pointed out several weeks ago, is that Starbucks, right, sells specialty coffee. I don't know that everything they sell is considered to be specialty, but they do have some specialty coffee offerings. And does that make them specialty? In the end, it all depends on what you like. But the parallel in chocolate is a specialty cocoa bean is any cocoa bean that has been awarded a certain grading score according to certified graders. And we might think right now, where we are right now, looking at the Cacao of Excellence program as a proxy for that. If you have received recognition by the Cacao of Excellence, those beans can be considered to be specialty cocoa beans. And by extension, a specialty chocolate is any chocolate which is made from a specialty cocoa bean. It's very, very straightforward. And one of the things that it does is it eliminates a lot of conflated ideas that complexify it. So in order to be specialty, right, it must be from a certain genetic variety, right? Or it must be from a certain place. It can only be single origin. I mean, it doesn't say anything about that. Specialty doesn't say anything about genetics or origin or fermentation or anything like that. All it does is says this bean makes good coffee. This bean makes good chocolate. Who decides? Specialized graders whose job it is to determine the quality of the unroasted, the green bean, the green cocoa bean, the green coffee bean, right? It goes through this process, right? And people go, give it the thumbs up. And that makes it simple. We can then layer on top of the notion, oh, this is a specialty cocoa bean that is a Trinitario genetics from a single farm on the island of Trinidad, right? But the single farm island of Trinidad genetics are not baked into the definition of what specialty cocoa is. And this is what I want to do with direct trade. Can we get to a definition of direct trade that is as simple without being simplistic and as straightforward as possible, right? So that we can agree, yes, this is what it means to trade directly in cocoa. And then other things, right, get layered on top of it, right? But they're not central to the definition. And one of the reasons why that's important is that the more extra conditions that you conflate, the more places where people will go, I don't agree to that, or I don't agree to that, or I don't agree to that. And now you've got this situation where nobody can come to an agreement on what direct trade means. So that's the framework. That's where I'm starting out today. And I did some research. I mean, straight up front, I use LLMs to help me do much of this research. But these LLMs have been trained on me over the course of the last 2 years. There's a lot of background about who I am. There's a lot of samples of my writing. So it has been trained on me and my background. And then I will go fact check almost everything that the LLM presents me and take very, very little at face value. So, but I do want to go and point out that this is what I do. So the first place I want to start out is how other define direct trade. There was a large study which was done by 2021 or so by the IESC, funded by the USDA. It was done by Gaia Cacao, who was the primary group of authors in the Netherlands. And in the global cocoa market study, they just pointed out what the specialty sector in cocoa calls direct trade usually involves an importer acting as an intermediary and contact point between the producer and the maker. So the study notes that the number of specialty importers serving small makers is low and makes market access point very concentrated. So this is just an observation that what most of the industry calls direct trade is not a chocolate maker buying directly from a farmer. It is a chocolate maker who's working through an intermediary, right? And that intermediary has the primary relationship with the farmer, right? Now, you may think that's direct trade. Many people do, right? And we'll run into a couple of places where that is um, that is um, that is presented as the way they think about direct trade, right? But it is important to know that this is the way, according to this study, that many people in specialty cocoa think about what direct trade is. They're not buying directly from a farmer, right? Always what they're doing is they're buying from an intermediary, and it is the intermediary that has the relationship or who has the relationship with the farmer. So important to know. So I wanted to look at coffee because the history of coffee when it comes to direct trade is at least as long as, or if not longer, than it is in cocoa. You know, like it is with fair trade. I mean, the first fair trade item, I mean, coffee came before cocoa when it came to fair trade. And so it makes sense to look at coffee. It is a similar, it is also an agricultural product. It is grown in many of the places where cocoa is grown, or cocoa grows in many of the places where coffee is grown. So intelligentsia coffee published criteria, which the coffee sector still treats as the reference implementation. Now, 5 criteria covering quality, farm practice, price, financial disclosure to farmer, and visit frequency. Now, it turns out that intelligentsia has, to some extent, backed off of some aspects of this. But what you can do is you can go to the direct trade page at Intelligentsia Coffee, and you can learn more about what it is that they do. You have to be careful. I did take a look. There's this link to something called the Extraordinary Coffee Workshop from this page, and it turns out that this link is broken. Oh no, it didn't work earlier. Oh, this is the Extraordinary Coffee on their page. There's a link to something else, which is not the workshop, but to something called, I will find it. I will find it. It's not coming to me right away. The Specialty Coffee Transaction Guide. So they're committed transparency. You go to this page. This page no longer exists at Emory University. Listen, link rot is a huge challenge. So we do need to, it happens. It's almost impossible to make sure that you get rid of it, all of it. I mean, I know that there are a number of links that no longer work on the Chocolate Life, but you can learn a little bit about what Intelligentsia thinks about direct trade in their coffee sourcing operations. And a lot of people think about it, about what Intelligentsia has done, right, as being in a leadership role. So Counterculture Coffee did the same thing. They built the thing that everyone else said was missing, and then they retired it, right? They had this step-by-step process, right? And importantly, the scheme deliberately put no cost on the farmer, a buyer, which is where I believe it exists. Anytime you have a third-party certification scheme, you should not require that the farmer pay for it. This is something that we're imposing, or we want to impose upon the farmer, and we shouldn't ask the farmer to pay for the cost of imposing a certification or a verification regime that we come up with, especially if we're not going to guarantee to purchase 100% of whatever the product is, all of the coffee, all of the cocoa that the farmer pays for certification. If we're going to ask them to pay for the certification, we should guarantee to buy all the certification, and that never happens. So it's really important to go. So, but the replacement, right, is guidelines rather than guaranteed standards. And then there's a link to 2026 Coffee Geek piece describe the current published standard as minimum 25% above fair trade, visit at least once annual, which is looser than the 2008 once per harvest. Anyway, so we've got some historical definitions for what direct trade meant. And I've got a table where we can go look at some of those. So it turns out that when it comes to the world of cocoa and chocolate, Taza might have the chocolate industry's first third-party certified direct trade cacao sourcing program. And what I did is I didn't put a link to it here. I have a link to it here. What I will do is no, I did actually. It's actually Taza is linked to. So here is their 2025 transparency report published on the 17th of December. And it starts with Taza direct trade. We said no to opaque supply chains and low quality cacao. We created the chocolate industry first part of the first third-party certified direct trade cacao sourcing program to ensure quality and transparency for all. Real face-to-face relationship with partners. As far as I'm concerned, this is one of the most important things. Partners who respect the environment. So partners who respect the environment, in my view, is not central to the definition of fair trade. It's a good to have, right? You may consider it to be a must-have, but it's not central to the idea of direct trade, right? It is possible to buy cocoa directly from a cocoa farmer, pay below market price, and the farmers do bad work. Is that quote unquote good direct trade? We would say, well, no, it doesn't change the status quo at all. It might be exploitive, right? That's another thing altogether. But, requiring that quote unquote respect for the environment is that organic certification. I mean, how do you define respect for the environment? Well, is it fair trade? There's a whole different set of conditions that you need to worry about. They provide us with the best organic cacao. Nobody provides anybody with second best anything. We pay them prices significantly higher than fair trade. So this is an interesting thing. They pay higher than fair trade, but are they paying at or above market, right? So you can see what we pay right here in the 2025 annual sourcing report. So let's go through it. Real relationships, the best cacao money for partners. So we pay at least $500 above market price, a 15 to 20% premium, and never less than $2,800 per metric ton for cacao. $2,800 per metric ton for cacao is meaningless given that the price is closer to $6,000 a ton, guaranteeing to pay $2,800 a ton when market is $6,000. But this was published in late December. We need to go look and see what the price was in late December. Okay, so so they paid a little over $2 million for 2,000 metric tons or 200 metric tons of cocoa. You will get a number of hectares, the number of female farmers, the number of farmers benefited, right? So these are all good things, top line, good things to do. But it says third-party certification here. It says base state organic certifiers. There's actually no link, right, to actually what is actually being certified. What claims are direct trade claims are being independently verified. There's no link to say, here's the set of claims and here's what is signed off, or we're base state certifiers and we signed off on these things, right? And if I'm speaking to Alex and other members of the team, I think you guys are, doing great work in many respects. But what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to be a little bit more transparent and actually showing us what you're actually certifying, what base state organic certifiers would actually certify what they did, right? So it's great that they have a third party looking at it. Really important. If you're going to be making any kind of these claims, you're going to be talking about prices, you're going to be talking about quantities, and things like that. Having some third party independently certify what you're doing, I think is an important aspect of what's going on. It's not central to the definition, right? But it is about documenting what you're doing. So let's go take a look. A couple of interesting things. So this is they have in the past purchased from Abokfa in Ghana and Latitude Trade Company in Uganda. But in 2025, they purchased from the Cooperative Pisa in Haiti, the Finca Helvetia, which is in the Dominican Republic, and they purchased Oco Caribe also from the Dominican Republic. What's interesting here is ROIG, which we need to find out if it appears elsewhere on the page. I don't believe it does. ROIG is a family in the Dominican Republic. I believe they're the second largest family after the Resec family, when it comes to processing and exporting cocoa. But I believe this is the only time Roig is mentioned. But it's important to know that the Roig is a family, right? And that they are intermediaries and they operate buying centers and post-harvest processing centers. And you can purchase cocoa from the Roig family. I have been in the Dominican Republic, and I have had conversations with Gabby Roig over the course of several years between 2010 and 2015, 2016, something like that. So I'm a little bit familiar with them. I don't know if we've actually met in person, but we have corresponded and had calls. So PISA, our export partner in Haiti, continues to struggle. I mean, this is one of the things that I really, really like. What they're doing is they're telling you a story about working with that supplier, right? I don't understand. Added to that, cocoa buyers from the Dominican Republic have been smuggling cocoa over the border from Haiti to fill undersupplied contracts. Also interesting to know, despite the challenges driving up the farm gate price for PISA and reducing availability and overall volumes, driving up the farm gate price, well, as long as that's getting paid to the farmer at the farm gate, driving up the farm gate price, I don't understand why that's a bad thing, right? So in 2025, they paid an average of $7,420 per metric ton, but the average price paid to farmers. So this is something that's not discussed, right? So they paid $74.20 per metric ton. Is that the landed price in the United States? Is that the export price at the port of export? We don't know where this average price was paid. And Alex, if you're listening, I'd like to see a min, a max, and a mean, right? Rather than just the average. Because there's, you paid an average, but was the minimum $1,000 above? Was the maximum $2,000 above? Where's the midpoint? This is not telling the full story. There's obviously a difference between the farm gate price and what they paid. Don't know what that is. And here's an interesting thing: employees' wage per day. I'd like to see how that compared to other agricultural laborers in Haiti generally. So were they getting more than the average agricultural worker, farm owner, or less than the agricultural worker? It would be interesting to know how that compares generally with the wages that are being paid in the farm sector, right? So here's where we go. So we have the farmers. The farmers sell to PISA. So PISA is looks to be an intermediary in Haiti. So it's not I don't believe it is not a cooperative per se, right? PISA, right, hands it over to Uncommon Cacao, and Uncommon Taza takes it from Uncommon. So one question I have here from a direct trade perspective is, who does Taza pay? Does Taza pay Uncommon? Does Taza pay PISA, or does Taza pay the farmers? So from what I can see here, it looks like there are at least two intermediaries between Taza and the farmers, right? And this doesn't include, right, people who take custody of the cocoa, like an exporter, right, or somebody who's a shipper, right? So is this direct? It's a short supply chain. One, two. There are only two intermediaries between Taza and the farmers. But the question is, who is Taza paying, right? If Taza is paying Uncommon, right, there's a quote from Emily Stone that I'll talk about, right, which puts a little meat on this bone that I'm describing for the non-vegetarians and vegans out there. I apologize, but I don't know that Taza is paying the farmers directly, which is what I would consider to be one of the hallmarks of direct trade. So direct-ish, right? Short supply chain, great thing. So again, one of the things I'm saying is that direct trade is only a claim about the structure of a supply chain, right? And we can go take a look at it. So we have Oko Caribe, the Dominican Republic. Okay, well, they paid $7,400 in Haiti. They paid closer to $11,000. Notice the differential. They paid $11,000 average price, but $8,500 at the farm, paid to the farmers, farm gate price. So the differential is not all that different, right? right? Than it is greater than it was in Haiti. We got a processor of cocoa beans in the central region who have been buying, who Taza has been buying from in 2013, experienced high levels of competitiveness. Absolutely, right? When the world market price was over $10,000 a ton, this led to a challenge finding buyers at a profitable level for the company, which means they had trouble selling the chocolate at the price that it took. Notice that we have the grower, ferment and dry, export, import, Taza. This is always the same for each one of their suppliers. But notice that they talked about ROIG up here, and they don't mention ROIG down here, right? So they buy from the farmers, it goes to Oko Caribe, it goes to Uncommon Cacao. Whereas the ROIG family in here, they mentioned it above, they don't mention it here. I would be interested in knowing where it is. And then we have Taza. So again, we have a short supply chain, right? But is Taza playing Uncommon, or is Taza paying Oko Caribe, or is Taza paying the farmers, right? It's not something that they mention here, right? And I want to know, where did the ROIG family go? They just sort of disappeared. Now, I have been to the Dominican Republic. I have been to this part of the country, Atomayor, which is in the Oriente, in the east. I've been there and have a little bit of experience talking about these kinds of things. Oh, listen, we got a real quick comment from Eva, Elvia, I'm sorry, from Peru, contacted today. From the Comensal Times in Peru. Elvia, thanks very much for the quick shout out. Thank you very much. And, how does this work in Peru? I've been to Peru on 5 or 6 different occasions between 2013 and 2017. I have a little bit of experience, but most of that is concentrated in Piura, San Martin, and Huánuco. A little bit of Ucayali. Haven't been down into the south around Cusco, so I'm not familiar with what's going on there. Never been to Marañón either, so I know something is going on, but not everything. But here again, right? There's this average price. What was the minimum? What was the maximum? What was the median? I'd like to know those things. Median is 50% of the purchases were below, and 50% of the purchases were above this price. The average price, the mean, could be something which is different as well. But we can multiply 75 metric tons by the average price. And again, we have this $14.20. I'm assuming it's US dollars. I don't know that it says that all currency is US dollars. It would make sense that it was. But I'd like to know how this compares with other workers in the agricultural segment of the Dominican Republic. It would be helpful to know, right? So we go down to the next one, Finca Helvecia, the Dominican Republic. Now, what's really interesting here is they go Finca Helvecia Resec. Resec is the other major cacao family on the islands. And I kind of want to know why it mentions ROIG here and not Resec. It would be, not quite sure. ROIG is mentioned here, but it's not mentioned further down. It could be an editing artifact, but this is one place where I know a little bit about what the structure of the market is in the Dominican Republic, and I'm looking at the inconsistencies, right? So if any of you has ever had the Grand Cru Hacienda from Falkland, from the Hacienda Helvecia, this is the same farm, right? So Helvecia means Swiss, so Finca Helvecia means the Swiss farm. And I'm actually largely responsible for introducing the owners of the Finca Helvecia. A family member, used to be a neighbor of mine when I lived in Westchester County, New York. And I introduced them to Falkland and made that connection. Falkland's a Swiss chocolate company. They thought it was a great idea to have a connection to a farm in the Dominican Republic named the Swiss Farm. And the Helvecia from Falkland was a phenomenal chocolate. My neighbor, his last name is Locandro, went to work in the trading operations at Resec. And so it's a family property. So it's interesting to know. Okay. So this is a quick, I mean, thank you very much. I mean, I love the audience and what they're saying. So we have Dionysia Chocolate. They talk about the relationship with Rogue in the 2024 partner report. I think as the graphic is left over from that. They use the same graphic. That may be, but that is exactly the point. You can't expect me to remember, or anyone to remember, that a particular graphic in the 2025 report comes from a different report and how they mentioned it. I'm taking this at face value, right? Because somebody walking in to this for the first time may not have that experience. I'm very, very glad that you do. But I find these kinds of editing errors, unfortunately, all too common. I found them in 2 consecutive reports from Tony's Chocolate Lonely, for example, right? The only thing that I ask, right, and maybe I'll write to Alex or somebody at the team there, and thank you very much for pointing this out to me, and saying, what's going on here? It appears that there is an editing error that you might want to change. The only thing that I ask is that I would ask Taza to do is actually to acknowledge the oops, we accidentally uploaded the wrong picture, and here's the right one, right? To indicate that yes, a change has been made. I called out Tony's, and they made the change because it was really a horribly egregious one, but they didn't acknowledge that they made the change and that the error was spotted by somebody who, not internally, not on their team. It was done by a third-party founder. But this is great. So they talk about the relationship with Roy. Can't expect me to go through every single previous report and figure out what that relationship might be. But thank you very much for letting me know. I think it's very, very helpful. Right. Right. They were able to secure 75 metric tons from the Hacienda Helvecia. So again, family-owned operation. When I knew them, the last time I visited this part of the Dominican Republic was in 2015. I actually visited the Finca Helvecia. I was working on Solbeso, and we secured some juice from the fermentation process, and then took it down into San Pedro de Macorís, into a rum distillery where we were fermenting the juice and looking to see if we could use it for Solbeso. And as they say, Locandro, one of the members was a neighbor of mine, which is how this whole thing got connected for me. But we see the Finca Helvecia goes to Resec Cacao, going to Atlantic Cocoa. Now, this is, again, we have this Taza to Atlantic to Resec. So we have this relatively short supply chain, right? Again, who is Taza paying? Are they paying Atlantic? Are they paying Resec? Are they paying directly the owners of Helvecia? But one thing that's not mentioned here, and again, this is where having a lot of background expertise helps people decode these. And I really didn't mean to spend, when I started out, I wasn't going to spend this much time with Taza generally, and on analyzing transparency reports. I think it's a skill you need to have, and it helps to understand these things. But Atlantic Cocoa is an arm of Ecom, right, which is an extremely large commodities company based in Switzerland. They do nuts, they do coffee, they do cacao, they do a lot of things. I've been to the offices of Atlantic Cocoa in New York City. A lot of people use Atlantic slash Ecom. And as a matter of fact, at one point, I know that Uncommon was using Ecom as their shipping partner. So, but, right, that just calling out Atlantic here without actually being transparent about the corporate parent of being Ecom, right? So why is that important? I believe Ecom is also the parent of Cacao Latitudes, which is the specialty cocoa division of Ecom. So knowing these things help you place things in a larger context. By the way, it's a beautiful farm. It's a beautiful farm. Great people. Can't say anything bad about it. It's really, 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 really lovely place to be. So I just wanted to go through the transparency port because I did mention Taza here. They have set the industry as the first third-party certified direct trade cocoa sourcing program, right? So they set the bar in a different place. You can go read what it is that they have to say and then go, oh, how transparent are they being, which is interesting. They do say regular visits, which is, I believe, a really, really central tenet for when it comes to being direct trade, right? So I mentioned, right, Taza mentions that he uses Uncommon as an intermediary. So in most cases, Uncommon takes title, right, which means they own the cocoa, right? So they'll buy it from the farmers, they'll buy it from the cooperative, but they take title, they take ownership. And when you buy the cocoa, you don't buy the cocoa from the farm or the cooperative, you buy the cocoa from Uncommon, right? So under my definition, a maker buying from Uncommon is not doing direct trade. We'll get to my definition a little while. But Emily Stone avoids direct trade precisely because it isn't clearly defined and describes too wide a variety of sourcing practices, right? And so, you know, kudos to Uncommon. They're upfront about what it is they're doing and how they set themselves up as a player in terms of the direct trade. But if Emily is not using the term direct trade, is Taza leaning on Uncommon? What does that do for the direct trade claim? I think it puts it at one remove from the farmer, or one more remove from the farmer. And so, according to my definition, it wouldn't qualify as fair trade, right? So, right, I'll just do a quick shout out to Cocoa Supply, who's a supporter of the Chocolate Life and PodSafe Chocolate as a premium member. And having done at least one collab over the last couple of years. So thank you very much to Lila and team for your support. So Cocoa Supply also takes title to the cocoa. So they take ownership of the cocoa, right? But I do want to point out that one thing they do, which I think is, right, to their credit, is that they have this very detailed explanation of how they arrived at the system that they're using, right? And I want you to go and read it, which is one of the reasons why I put the link here. You may agree or disagree with what it is they have to say, right? But they make it a note. Some specialty traders are independent, right? Some are owned, associated, or financed, and it should be and financed by larger commodity companies. So I mentioned Cacao Latitudes; they're owned by Ecom. Right. And so you think you're dealing with a small, scrappy specialty cocoa company. And it turns out what you're doing is you're working for a very, very small arm of a very, very large company. And in some respects, Cacao Latitudes, in my opinion, right, is sort of is doing some greenwashing of Ecom, saying, we can do this really, 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 quote unquote, good, highly transparent direct trade. We can give classes, we can educate the entire industry, while at the same time that doesn't obviate any of the sourcing practices of the parent company. So that's why I wanted to point out that Cacao Latitudes was a part of Ecom, Atlantic Cocoa is a part of Ecom, right? And they'll do this. So they talk about different forms: maker to farmer direct, origin processor model, which is what they do. I mean, in terms of the description, this is I think a great way of thinking about it. But what they do is they talk about what they think. The short definition: direct trade is a sourcing model where buyers work more directly, right? And it is more is doing a lot of work there. Oh, you work more directly. Well, the typical cocoa might go from the farmer to an aggregate, to a middleman, to another middleman, to another middleman. So in Ecuador, for example, the farmer might sell to Coyote. The Coyote would sell to a fermentation center. The fermentation center might sell to an aggregator, right, who gets the stuff to the port. And so there are at least, the Coyote, the Centro de Copio, the collection center, and then the final processor. And I saw that on several different occasions when I was in Ecuador, that exact process. And so the cocoa could change hands 3 or 4 or 5 times, right? And sometimes many more than 4 or 5 times. And so more directly, right, is a little bit of is as I say, is doing a lot of work, right? And so what we need to talk about what it is that we mean, right? And so they talk about the traditional cacao trading system and the multi-layer supply chain, which I talk about: farmer, local collectors, or intermediaries. This is often plural, not just one: exporter, international trader, processor, manufacturer. So the processor or manufacturer is the small maker. And so here are a bunch of big ones, right? There are many, many more, right? But you get the idea. So it's a really good walkthrough. It's an independent. I mean, it is written from the point of view of cocoa supply and what they're trying. So there is a bias there. So it's important to understand. But I wanted to go and talk about it. So in the world of cocoa and chocolate, so again, using an LLM, got to say that they pull the stuff. They will take what might take 10 or 20 hours of work for somebody to do and put it inside of 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So I've got a couple of companies. And again, you go look at the table, push back. If you're a member of the Chocolate Life Free or Premium, you can go put a comment in the comments at the bottom of this page. But I took a look at the difference between Taza, Askinosie, Beyond Good, Dandelion, Good Now Farms, and Uncommon. Again, as a trader, as a maker, right? And you can get an idea about, do they talk about direct trade, annual by a USDA accredited organic certifier, what their price rules are, right? And you can get an idea about what other people are doing around this concept of direct trade. But hey, there's no published guidelines for visits. Visit requirement at least once a year, in person or by video. I think, a Zoom meeting or something like that, or a WhatsApp video call, is not a substitute for an in-person visit. Maybe between visits, you might check up, right, in a video call, but sitting down with somebody who's sitting in an office is not the same thing as being there, in my opinion. So, but Askinosie, Sean visits every farm every year. COVID had caused some of those problems. They don't have a fixed rule about prices. They average 35% over the world market, 25% over fair trade across 11 years. And one of the things that they do, which is unique, is they do a profit share. None of these other companies are profit sharing. But again, Beyond Good, formerly Madakas, packaging says certified direct trade, but they don't name a certifier. If you're going to say you're certified direct trade, you should name your certifier, right? It's really, really important because people are relying, right? The people who are your customers are relying on this, and how do they know what's going on? So Uncommon Cacao, what they're doing, and again, right? Hats off to Emily to say, hey, this term direct trade, there's no settled definition, and so we're not going to call ourselves direct trade. Right? They can facilitate a direct trade relationship, just as cocoa supply can facilitate a direct trade relationship. You could work through Lila and her team, find a farm, visit the farm, pay the farmers directly, in which case cocoa supply becomes the custodian of the cocoa, not the owner of the cocoa. It's a subtle difference, but an important difference. But right, there are ways to do this through these brokers. Again, depending upon who you are paying, right, and where the markups are important, right? Differentiation here. I also want to talk about this organization called Direct Cacao. This was something that was founded in, again, we can see 2010, 2011, 2012. This is a meeting of the group in 2012. I believe it was in Honduras. And you can see it's a fairly star-spangled group of people. Frank Coleman, who was the founder of CHOCOA, this became the Ingeman Cocoa in Nicaragua, but CHOCOA retained ownership of their operations in Honduras. We see Martin Christie here, Maricel Pucia, Santiago Peralta, Mikko Frizz Holm. I believe this is Susana Cardenas. This is Art Pollard of Amano. So, I mean, it's Gary Guittard, Guittard Chocolate. So it's quite a group of people. This is Alex Rast, associated with the International Institute of Chocolate and Cacao Tasting. So, as I say, it's quite an interesting group. For one reason or another, they were not able to make it a going concern. You can go to the Wayback Machine, for example, and this is the website, directcacao.com. We find that it was pinged 15 times over 12 years. And if you try to go and actually go look, there's nothing there. And so one of the things one of the things I would love to be able to do, when it comes to go take a look at Direct Cacao, is actually find out what the publicly published positions of this group was. And even though last I looked, the domain was for sale, it turns out that there's no independent record, nothing in the Wayback Machine, which enables you to go and say, oh, this is what their position was on what direct trade meant and didn't mean. But a really, really stellar group of people who were involved in trying to get it up and running. Most of whom everybody that I recognize in this photo is still involved in chocolate and cocoa in one form or another. Gary is retired out of Guittard, but certainly is involved in the business at one level. So interesting to know, right? But here's a table, right? So you've got the name of the company, the role, maker, right? Maker at origin, right? As opposed to a trader and importer. The ownership between, right? Farmer and buyer. So these are intermediaries, right? So buys from co-ops and farmer associations, imports directly. This is not quite true. They're not imports directly. They're using Uncommon, right? They're using Atlantic to do the transportation logistics. Again, I don't know who they're paying, and it's not clear from what they're talking about who Taza is paying, right? But visit requirements, price rules, outside verification. I did the same thing for some coffee companies. So we have Intelligentsia that I've mentioned, right? Counterculture, which I mentioned. So third-party verifiable standards is 2008, since replaced by purchasing principles that are guidelines rather than standards with quantified minimums, but the same thing, company role, ownership, visit requirement, price rule, right? So Intelligentsia says 25% above fair trade. We have Stumptown, Onyx Coffee Lab, Tim Wendelboe. People may know Tim Wendelboe if they're real coffee Greek, or they watch a lot of James Hoffman videos. So you get an idea about what the different positions are and what they have to say. When I get a chance, I will go back and, if I can, put links which explain these positions. As you might imagine, there's a lot here. We have Cafe Import, Sustainable, Harvest International, and Onyx Coffee Labs. So, and then because Mike King at Encore Coffee is often in these groups, so as a visitor, what I did is I did a comparison between Onyx, their chocolate company, which is Terroir by Onyx, and then Encore Coffee and Encore Chocolate. And so you can see a little bit about how they differ. I do want to go and talk a little bit about what Onyx does. So here is a page on their website about their Ecuador dark. And you go take a look at it. It's a dark chocolate for purists. And we're going to scroll down. It takes a while to get to the scroll. And they talk about green cost. So Onyx, which has got just an insane level of detail when their coffee, and I'll show you one of their coffees, right? Talks about the green cost. They don't actually publish the cost of the cocoa bean, right? So there is this thing, they don't talk about it. The subject of paying for raw cocoa is inherently complicated. While the amount paid is very important, the payment terms and type of contract negotiated during the purchase are also paramount. That is true. But they offer green cost for coffee. They can figure it out for cocoa. One of the challenges I have with the template that they've got here is this C market price. This is a coffee price, not a cocoa price, right? And so C market, there is no $1.88 price which is related to cocoa, right? We'll get to that someplace else. But hey, they got this thing says low cadmium third-party testing. View the report. Absolutely, this is great. But notice the test report, Q2813Y. This doesn't actually say which sample was tested, right? And it is this sample report. if we go and take a look at another bar, this India chai milk chocolate, right? So what are we going to look at here? Number one is the green cost. They don't tell you what they're paying for the cost of the beans. This is the same C market price, which is, again, a coffee thing, not a chocolate thing. We go take a look at the low cadmium, and guess what? Even though the beans are from India compared from Ecuador, it's the same report, right? Which is not a good idea, right? So if you're going to have different reports, you want to have, if you're going to have different tests, you want to have different reports, right? So, and again, this doesn't say which sample it was. So this is a place where, hey, look, they've got a cadmium report. If you actually didn't take a look at more than one, you wouldn't necessarily have the full picture. So let's go to, again, this is for one of their coffees, Southern Weather. I mean, this is, they spent a lot of time on the graphics here, right? And you go through, right? So they've been able to figure out what the green cost is, right? It's $5.68 a kilo. The pay structure is B. The market price is $4.04 for this. Again, there's no C market, so it's really interesting what that difference is. But they're saying, here's the green cost. Here's what we paid for transportation, right? So they paid $5.68 a kilo, but and they paid another 9 cents per kilo for transportation, which means $5.77. That might be the cost at their workshop, right? Move from the producing country to the roastery in Arkansas. So that's the difference between, there's no intermediate. What's the FOB price and things like that. So, I mean, better than most people do. And there's a lot of information here. Listen, if you're really geeky, this is, a roast. This is a brewing profile. You can find a roast profile if you're roasting yourselves. I mean, there's a lot of real information here, and chocolate cocoa and chocolate could benefit from all of those things, right? But I did want to go and show, some of the differences here. So we have Onyx, and I wanted to show you a little bit of the differences. They do more for coffee than they do in chocolate. I mean, a lot of people think that Onyx sourcing practices are among the better ones, and so something to consider, right? They are a certified B Corp, but their reports are self-published, right? So they're, just because you're certified B Corp doesn't mean that people are certifying your sourcing reports, right? So, and hey, Mike's got a really small coffee business. He's got a real small chocolate business, right? He's not necessarily making direct trade claims, but we can find out what some of the differences are. So this is not a knock against what it is that Mike is doing. It's just that there aren't a whole lot of established coffee roasters who are also chocolate makers. And when I was thinking about this, obviously, because Mike is a friend of the channel, that I thought I would include in here. So this is, I mean, if I made a mistake, Mike, please let me know. I will update this table, right? So that goes in, and we're going to spend the last couple of minutes here thinking about how I define direct trade. In this, I'm going to be a little more didactic maybe than many people might be, right? So the first thing is, and I'm going to repeat, right? Direct trade is a claim about the structure of a supply chain. It means, right, I am buying directly or more directly. It's about a structure. It's about a claim about the structure of a supply chain. Direct trade is not a claim about the prices that you pay. It is not a claim about farming practices. It is not a claim about labor practices, gender equity, deforestation, or concepts that better fit within definitions of sustainable or ethical sourcing. Direct is merely a claim about the structure of a supply chain, right? So keeping a definition streamlined is what makes it useful and usable. So if you said, in order to be direct trade, well, you could buy directly from the farmer, or you could buy from an intermediary, as long as the intermediary was the first buyer of the cocoa, right? So, okay, all right, so I'm not buying from a farmer, I'm buying from the first buyer. right? And oh, but we're going to say it has to be organically certified and it has to be this, and you have to pay 25% above some price floor, which is changing on a daily basis, right? And the more of these additional ideas, additional concepts that you layer on top of the basic idea, right? The basic concept, the harder it is to get buy-in. And right now, within the world of specialty chocolate, there is no one dominant player. There's no one person, right? There's nobody like Intelligentsia. There's nobody like Onyx. There's nobody like that really in chocolate. Maybe Taza is about as close as it gets. But none of them have the size, market clout, or interest, right, in saying, we're going to define what direct trade is and everybody should follow us, right? And so this is where keeping it simple, keeping it straightforward, keeping it streamlined makes an enormous amount of sense, right? We're going to say direct trade is a claim about. So, right, two concepts central to how I think. I mean, how I think, right? This notion of it's a claim about the structure of the supply chain. It's not a loophole, right? It is the point of what I'm suggesting. I want to make it as streamlined as possible, and people can go, I get it. So first one is there's no change of ownership between the farmer and the maker. There's no change of ownership. That doesn't mean there's chain of custody changes. So for example, if you want to export out of Ecuador, you may do LCL consolidation. Or if you're getting into the hands of somebody like an intermediary export, if you want to bring it in the United States, there probably only needs to be one registered owner of everything in the container, right? And so is that a question of taking ownership, or are you legally assigning custody? There is a fundamental difference between those two concepts, and I'm not talking about custodianship here. I'm talking about ownership. Now, the real question is, are you paying the farmer directly, which I would suggest is, if you really want to be direct trade, you are paying the farmer directly, right? Or are you paying an intermediary who is then paying the farmer? Now, if you're paying the intermediary because you personally aren't there in person to pay for the purchase, or there's a difficult banking relationship, which is often the case, or you need to pay in cash, right? Which is, I mean, sometimes the case. It was the case in Bolivia when I visited the Hacienda Tranquilidad. But in that case, Volker Lehmann, right? He owned the land and he was hiring people to harvest the cocoa for him. So he was the farm owner. It was hired labor. He had to pay the labor. But we can talk about ownership, right? Volker owned the cocoa, right? And he was paying people to do the labor, right? And that's where I think it's important. You want to be direct to the payment. Now, again, it is ownership and custodianship. So you could work through somebody like Lila Carvajal and Cocoa Supply. You could say, hey, Lila, I'd like you to introduce me to a farmer, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with that farmer, and I'm going to commit to buy cocoa from that farmer over the course of a number of years if they'll commit to delivering a minimum amount of cocoa to me at a price which is going to depend upon what the market price is. I can't, because of the way the rules work, I can't wire the money directly into their account. But what I'd like you to do is pay them on my behalf, right? I don't have a problem with that idea, right? I don't think anybody should have a problem with that idea, right? But it needs to be stated out loud. This is the relationship we have, right? There are structural issues in the banking economy in Bolivia or someplace like that that makes it impossible for us to pay the person directly, maybe crypto, right? But you get the idea, right? In which case, what we do is we negotiate a price with the farmer, right? We pay that money to, right, the intermediary, and the intermediary pays the farmer, and we connect with the farmer and make sure they received 100% of the amount that we agreed that they receive, right? So that loop has to be closed. In which case, Cocoa Supply or Uncommon or some other company becomes the physical custodian of the cocoa, because their job is to get it to your factory, right, your workshop, but they're not the owner of the cocoa, which is a fundamental difference, right? You're the owner of the cocoa. You paid directly, right? That's the important thing, right? So no change of ownership. If the farmer sells it to an intermediary who sells it to an intermediary, right, who then passes it on to an exporter, that's not direct. Uh, it may be more direct, right, but it is not direct. Just shortening it, that's a good goal, right? But it's not necessarily what direct means. The other part of it that's really important, again, two concepts central to how I think about direct trade. Number one is this ownership issue. And number two is a regular, ongoing, in-person relationship, right? If you want to consider yourself a direct trade chocolate maker and you have never visited the farm you're buying from, you're not direct trade, right? If you've never been there, you've never walked the trees, you've never shaken hands with, you've never sat down and eaten with them, you don't know anything about them, right? You are not a direct trade chocolate maker. Direct trade is about that ownership interest and this in-person relationship. Really, really important that happened. Because what you're doing is that everything you think you know about the farm, you're seeing through somebody else's eyes, somebody else's experiences. They're curating it, right? They're filtering it. They may not knowingly do things about it, but you're relying on this person. It's either you, the maker, or an authorized representative of the company makes at least one documented in-person visit every year. Ideally during peak harvest, so you can see how you can go in, you can watch the trees being harvested, you can see how fermentation starts, you get to see everything, right? Maybe the beginning of drying and things like that. I mean, it's important to have that understanding documented. You take photos, you take videos, um, you know, it's important, right? And because in part your customers are going to be able to trust you more. It's really, really important. The third part of this, and it's not part of the two central concepts, right? Is what I do is documentation and verifications are not part of the definition. Price is not part of the definition. Documentation and verification are how you demonstrate you meet the definition. So you could say, oh, I publish a report and that report is audited by a third party. So that third party could be an organic certifier. Listen, the third party could be a certified public accountant, right, who has duty of candor because number one, they're filing your taxes, and that's a bad idea to willfully misrepresent on your taxes, right? But you can have your accountant put together a schedule. This is what we paid, right, and have them sign off on it. Now you don't necessarily need to share it, but you can say independently verified by blah 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 CPA, right, or this firm's certified public accountants, right? That's fine. That's part of the documentation verification about how you demonstrate that you've done this perfectly. Okay, again, I want a little bit more than just here's the average price that we paid, right? It is here's the minimum, here's the maximum, here's the mean, here's the median. If you're going to report what the average wage was among your farmers in the cooperatives you purchase from, talking about how that compares to other members of the farm economy in that country makes a lot of sense. To make sure you're talking about, oh, here's the currency I'm working in, so that everything has been converted to the same currency. Really important to understand. And then also, if you're going to talk about market price, talk about what the market price was on the days that you made your transactions. Because talking about average market price over the course of a year doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I bought on the 14th of February. This is how much I paid. This is what the market price was on the 14th of February, right? And from there, you can get the average, you can get the min, max, and median. Those are things that you can do from there. But, right, provide the information, right? You can de-identify it. You can say farm A in this country, right? Or although you can name the farm, you can do that, but you have an independent documentation verification. Certification is, independently certified, independently verified, a little bit of semantics there going on. I would say, Bay State, which is Taz's certifier, is an organic certifier in Massachusetts, but Bay State is probably not the organic certifier in the Dominican Republic. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, right? So calling their third party certified um, when it's not about organic certification, again, there's a little more there to do, but you get the idea. It could be a lawyer who's doing this for you. Again, a duty of candor, right? They're not supposed to lie, and so you can do it that way. It's not necessary to go out and have, right? Try to figure out a way to have an organization like an organic certifier, quote unquote, certify your records. And I focus on ownership, custodianship, and payment, right? Little typo, as demonstrated. There's no single definition of fair trade, or direct trades, excuse me, and no common set of standards, which is why I think that ownership and payment are the only criteria that produces a yes or no answer rather than a story. You can agree, you can disagree with me, you can go into the comments, let me know. But that's the thought. If you're going to be direct trade, what you want to do is you need to ensure that there's no change of ownership. You as the buyer own the cocoa the entire time. You can temporarily place it in the custodianship of somebody who's going to help you get it from point A to point B. That's a different thing entirely, right? But if you're not, you want to be paying the farmer directly if you can, right? But if you're not paying the farmer directly, you're paying an intermediary to pay the farmer. What you need to do is you need to document that step and then close the loop to make sure that 100% of what you said you were going to pay to the farmer actually received. That's the important step. Close that loop. Now, the intermediary may charge you a price, right? But that price should be on top of the price you pay the farmer, not deducted from the price that you pay the farmer. Really, really important thing to understand. Again, you may agree or disagree, but I think that what I've displayed here is a very, very simple way to talk about. Now, complex perhaps in implementation, but it's simple and streamlined, and people will understand what it means when you say, when I trade directly, it means that I am paying the farmers directly. I own the cocoa from the farm gate. I own the cocoa from the farm gate to my back door, right? And I think that's a great way to think about doing it. And that's it for today's episode of Pod Save Chocolate. This is the post for today's episode. You can follow, I'll fix the typo when I get a chance. And just a quick note, a week from today, after next Friday's episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is going to be the annual Ask Me Anything member AMA. The August newsletter has not gone out. It's going to go out over the course of the weekend. There'll be the link to the episode in that. This coming Tuesday, I'm going to be following up on last Tuesday's episode with Keith Ayub, where we talked about a scientific report on whether or not more processing always means less good for you when it comes to cocoa. And we're going to be taking a look at ways to debunk junk internet health claims. All right. So just wanted to do that. That's this coming Tuesday. And finally, this episode, of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, sponsored by the members. You can click the join button. There's always a free membership tier, has been since 2008. If you do have the financial resources, for as little as $5 a month or $42 a year, you can support the work that we do here. If you're over on YouTube, join the channel, join Pod Save Chocolate, subscribe to Pod Save Chocolate, do like, subscribe, share, comment, all of those things to help increase the engagement for the channel. And with that, everybody, listen, have a great weekend. It's been fun for me. I hope it's been fun for you, because if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you just might be doing it wrong. Till the next time, everybody, ciao.